never thought a necklace could turn my world upside down. On the night of our anniversary, Michael pushed a small velvet box across the restaurant table toward me. His smile was polite but empty, and I wanted so badly to believe this was a peace offering. For a fleeting moment, I let myself hope that maybe after years of silent dinners and bruises covered in makeup after countless nights where he tracked every dollar I spent and every hour I left the house, maybe this was his way of saying he still loved me. My fingers trembled as I opened the box. Inside was a delicate gold necklace with a teardrop pendant that caught the candlelight. It should have been beautiful, but then I saw it. At the clasp, faint but undeniable, was a dark, reddish smear. I blinked hard, thinking it must be wax from the candle, but no, it was dried blood clinging stubbornly to the metal. My throat closed. My pulse pounded so loudly I thought the whole restaurant might hear it. Michael leaned in closer and whispered that the necklace symbolized our bond. His voice was soft, but his eyes were sharp, watching me, measuring my reaction the way he always did. My mind flashed back to the night he grabbed my wrist so hard it left purple rings that lasted for weeks. To the time he smashed a plate against the wall inches from my head just because dinner was late. To the way he once pressed his palm against my throat and smiled as I gasped for air until he finally let go. Now, holding this necklace, the memories mixed with the sight of blood, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I nodded and forced a smile as if nothing was wrong. He sipped his wine, humming lightly as though he had given me the most thoughtful gift in the world. I clutched the box in my lap, terrified to let it go, terrified of what it meant. Dinner blurred. I could not taste the food. I could not hear the chatter around us. I only saw the blood and felt the weight of years of control pressing down harder than ever. On the drive home, he hummed along with the radio, tapping the steering wheel cheerfully. I stared out the window, the necklace heavy in my purse, like a piece of evidence from a crime I was too afraid to name. Questions clawed at me. Whose blood was it? Where had this necklace come from? What had he done? My hands shook so violently I had to grip them together in my lap. When we pulled into the driveway, he kissed my cheek casually before heading into his office. The silence of the house felt like a tomb. I stood frozen in the doorway, clutching the box, realizing that this necklace was not a gift at all. It was a message, a warning, maybe even a confession. And in that moment, as the walls of my marriage closed in around me, I wondered if I had ever truly known the man I had married, or if I had been living with a monster all along. Michael and I had been married for 12 years, and for most of that time, I convinced myself that his temper and controlling behavior were just quirks I had to accept for love. Our home in suburban Chicago looked perfect from the outside, manicured lawn, freshly painted siding, and a mailbox with our initials carved neatly into it. Inside the walls held a different story, the quiet of our living room masking the tension that built like a storm over the years. I would often arrive home from work, my hands shaking from the endless meetings and deadlines, and he would watch me from the armchair in the corner, waiting assessing. He never asked how my day went. Instead, he would comment on my appearance, sometimes complimenting my outfit, other times criticizing a choice of shoes, as if the wrong heel could ruin our entire evening. I learned early on to avoid making eye contact when he was in a bad mood. One wrong glance, and the lecture would start first subtle questioning why I had taken 15 minutes longer in traffic, and then escalating to a harsh pointed voice that made my stomach twist. Michael controlled everything in the household, from the thermostat to the credit cards. I was allowed to work, but every expense had to be approved, every social engagement reported and justified. Friends slowly drifted away. Family became a distant memory because he would whisper doubts into my ears, small lies that grew into mountains. He made me feel guilty for wanting anything outside his domain. I remember the first time he slammed my laptop shut in anger because I had researched vacation rentals without asking. He told me I was selfish and careless, that my desires threatened the stability of our home. That night, I cried in the bathroom until my pillow was soaked. Over the years, the incidents grew more aggressive. There were nights when I slept with my arms pressed tightly against my body to avoid his hand finding my ribs. There were dinners when he threw silverware across the table, simply because I laughed at the wrong time. And yet every morning he would smile, kiss my cheek, and apologize in a way that twisted my heart into forgiving him before the day even began. Our relationship had become a cycle of fear, tension, brief reprieves, and then escalation. Michael's favorite tactic was emotional manipulation, often mingled with physical intimidation. He would remind me that nobody would ever love me as he did, that I was too flawed for the world outside his grasp. Sometimes I found myself agreeing, feeling the cold truth that maybe I could not survive without his approval. But there were moments, fleeting yet vivid, when I remembered the woman I was before him, confident, independent, unafraid. Those memories clashed violently with the reality of my life now. As my 38th birthday approached, the weight of these years pressed on me harder than ever. Michael, in his twisted way, presented gifts that were meant to feel like love, but often carried hidden threats or reminders of control. The anniversary necklace was no different. It was more than a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of everything he had done and everything I had endured silently. That night, the restaurant seemed too bright, the faces of strangers too sharp, their laughter too loud. I felt detached from everyone around me, trapped in a cage built over a dozen years, with Michael as both warden and executioner. And yet, under the layers of fear and tension, a small ember of anger flickered inside me, a quiet resistance that had survived despite everything. I clenched my fists under the table, thinking of the blood on the necklace, thinking of all the nights I had cried quietly, thinking of every time he had crossed a line. The house we returned to was silent, cold, and oppressive. The walls seemed to lean in, reminding me that I had been living with danger disguised as love. I set the necklace on the counter, staring at it as though it might tell me its secret. Every instinct screamed that I should leave, that I should run, but fear held me in place, bound by the years of control and manipulation. Yet, in that same instant, a plan began forming in my mind, a careful, deliberate strategy to reclaim my life and expose the truth of Michael's nature. I would need patience, intelligence, and courage, and I knew the road ahead would be dangerous. But for the first time in years, I felt a surge of clarity. The woman who had survived in silence was beginning to awaken, and Michael's control, no matter how strong, was not absolute. The tension in the house was palpable as I prepared myself for the coming days, aware that every move would need to be calculated and that every step toward freedom would test me in ways I had not yet imagined. The morning after our anniversary, I woke to the dull ache in my chest that had become familiar over the years, a weight that never seemed to lift. The necklace lay on the dresser, its delicate chain twisted slightly, the pendant catching the morning light in a way that made the tiny droplets of blood I had seen the night before glimmer like sinister jewels. I remembered exactly when I had noticed it in the restaurant, the red stain marring the gold, as if it carried a message meant just for me. Questions swirled through my mind. Was it his blood? Was it someone else's? How had it gotten there? I felt my pulse quicken, the fear I had suppressed for years, rising like smoke into every corner of my body. Michael appeared in the doorway, his casual smile a mask for the tension I knew simmered beneath. "Good morning," he said, voice light, but the way his eyes darted to the dresser betrayed a hint of something unsaid. I held my tongue, my mind racing. The necklace was more than a gift now. It was a clue, a crack in the carefully constructed facade of our marriage. I knew I could not confront him openly without risking immediate danger, but I could not ignore it either. The days that followed were filled with subtle tests. I pretended to go about my routines, careful not to alert him to the storm brewing inside me. I examined the necklace repeatedly, noting the smudge on the back of the pendant, the faint scratches along the chain that suggested it had been in a struggle. Every detail seemed significant, every tiny imperfection a hint at a hidden truth. My best friend Lisa noticed the change in my demeanor. Over lunch one afternoon, she leaned across the table and whispered, "Something is wrong, Giselle. You can't hide it." I nodded, grateful for her intuition, but wary of speaking too much. Trust had become a precious commodity in my life, and I knew that even friends could be pulled into Michael's orbit of control if I let my guard down. That evening, I decided to follow Michael discreetly when he left the house, keeping a careful distance as he drove to a part of town I rarely visited. My heart pounded in my chest with a mix of fear and adrenaline. I watched from the shadows as he entered a small, dimly lit workshop tucked between shuttered stores. Peering through a crack in the door, I saw him handling objects I could not identify at first, but then the realization hit me like ice water tools, sharp and deliberate, and a small collection of jewelry identical to the necklace he had given me. Bloodstains were unmistakable on the counter, and my stomach turned. This was no accident, no isolated incident. Michael had a pattern, a dangerous, violent pattern, and I had been blissfully unaware, protected only by the facade of domestic normalcy. Panic surged, but so did a new resolve. I could not allow this to continue, not for me and not for anyone else who might fall victim to his control. That night, I researched everything I could about similar cases, discreetly using my phone while he slept. I documented details, took photos of the necklace, and kept careful notes about his behavior, creating a secret archive that could protect me if I needed it. The duality of my life became sharper than ever, the woman who smiled at dinner parties and nodded at casual conversations, and the woman who stalked the truth in the dark corners of her home. Each day I learned more about his methods, each discovery stoking the fire of determination inside me. I began crafting a plan, meticulous and deliberate, knowing that one wrong move could unleash his wrath. The catalyst was clear. The necklace, once a symbol of love, had revealed the violent reality of Michael's psyche. My life, carefully contained for years, had suddenly expanded into a dangerous but necessary battlefield. I realized that escape and exposure would require courage, intelligence, and patience. I could no longer rely on silence or hope. I had to act, and every step had to be precise. As the sun set on another tense evening, I held the necklace in my hand, the tiny specks of blood glinting in the fading light, and felt the first surge of true empowerment. Michael had underestimated me, as he always had, assuming fear would keep me compliant. But now, armed with knowledge and a burning determination, I was no longer just a victim. I was ready to fight to reclaim my life and to expose him for the man he truly was, no matter the cost. The coming days would test every ounce of my courage, but for the first time in years, I felt the thrill of possibility, the intoxicating sense that I could turn the tables and orchestrate a reckoning that Michael could never anticipate. The necklace was no longer a gift. It was a signal, a call to action, and the first step in a dangerous but necessary journey toward justice and liberation. The following week became a tense tightrope, each interaction with Michael loaded with subtle scrutiny and suppressed fear. I moved through our home like a careful actor, measuring every word, every gesture, ensuring he did not notice the storm I was quietly assembling. His charm, once comforting, now felt like a weapon, the casual smile hiding sharp intentions that could erupt at any moment. At dinner, he spoke of mundane matters, the stock market, local news, always observing my reactions with a predator's precision. I nodded, smiled, and kept my emotions locked, but inside my mind raced with the details I had gathered about his violent tendencies. Lisa's warnings echoed in my head. "Trust your instincts, Giselle. You cannot face this blindly." She had seen pieces of the truth through my fragmented confessions, the subtle changes in my demeanor, the tense glances when Michael left the room. Her support, though cautious, gave me a lifeline. One evening, the confrontation became unavoidable. Michael accused me of spending too much time at the office, insinuating that my late hours were more than just work-related. His voice was calm, but edged with menace, a dangerous combination I had learned to fear. "You think you are too smart to be controlled, don't you?" he said, pacing behind the dining table, the shadows playing across his face, in ways that made him seem twice as tall and twice as dangerous. I kept my tone neutral, but I let my eyes meet his with a subtle defiance he had not anticipated. "I'm just trying to keep up with my responsibilities," I said carefully, feeling the adrenaline pump through my veins. For a moment, he studied me, the weight of years of dominance and control colliding with the unfamiliar defiance he now saw in my posture. That hesitation, brief as it was, gave me an opening. I stepped slightly closer, a calculated risk, maintaining eye contact without showing fear. The tension in the room was palpable, as if the air itself had thickened, every tick of the clock amplified. Michael's expression flickered a mix of confusion, anger, and something almost like respect, though it was buried deep beneath layers of pride and aggression. I knew I had crossed a boundary, but I also knew that testing it was necessary. The following days were marked by a quiet escalation. He began monitoring my actions more closely, subtle but invasive. Calls from friends were questioned, my emails scrutinized, and casual remarks about my schedule met with sharp interrogations. Yet each intrusion revealed more about his insecurities and patterns, giving me ammunition I could later use. One afternoon, he reached for the necklace, pretending casual interest, but the tension between us was palpable. "I hope you appreciate it," he said, his voice smooth, hiding a knife-like edge. I allowed a tiny shiver to pass through me, careful not to show fear, while inside the reality of his violence and obsession surged. That night, I documented everything, writing down every word, every movement, every detail of his expressions, noting the subtle cracks in his armor that could be exploited. I prepared myself mentally for the eventual confrontation, knowing that intelligence and timing would be my greatest allies. The first true confrontation was not dramatic in the way one might imagine. It was strategic, a dance of words and glances of subtle dominance tested against calculated compliance. Each question he asked, each accusation I answered with precision, sowing seeds of doubt in his mind while keeping my own safe. The tension became almost unbearable, a constant hum that followed me through every room of our house. I felt the danger in my chest like a live wire, but alongside it a newfound power, the awareness that I could manipulate the situation, that I could survive and expose him without immediate physical retaliation. By the end of the week, I had mapped out patterns, identified triggers, and begun quietly assembling evidence that could protect me and, if necessary, bring justice. The necklace remained the centerpiece of this growing tension, a silent witness to my fear and growing resolve. Its presence reminded me daily of the thin line between compliance and resistance, between hidden terror and intelligent action. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside and Michael's breathing beside me, I realized that the first confrontation had set the tone. The balance of power had subtly shifted, and though he remained dangerous, I was no longer completely at his mercy. Each calculated step I took brought me closer to exposing him, to reclaiming the autonomy and safety that had been stripped away for years. The week ended with a fragile equilibrium, tension taut and ready to snap, a prelude to the decisive moves that I knew would come. I felt the first real taste of empowerment, a dangerous but intoxicating sense that I could navigate the perilous waters he created and turn the narrative on my terms. My path was fraught with risk, but for the first time in a long time, I was no longer merely a participant in his controlling game. I was preparing to become the orchestrator of a reckoning that he would never see coming. Over the next 2 weeks, I immersed myself in a careful, calculated investigation, each action deliberate and meticulously planned. I began by reviewing every financial statement, every receipt, every transaction Michael had made under the guise of generosity, searching for patterns that might reveal his true motives and control tactics. The blood-stained necklace, once a symbol of twisted affection, became a focal point, a reminder that appearances were always deceptive and that evidence could be found in the smallest details. I discreetly photographed documents, logged conversations, and recorded my own observations about his behavior, noting inconsistencies that could later be used against him. Lisa became my silent ally, providing insight and guidance on the legal and strategic aspects of documenting abuse and manipulation. I also reached out to a private investigator, pretending to seek advice on a business matter but discreetly gathering information about Michael's past incidents and potential witnesses who could corroborate patterns of violence. Each encounter, each interaction was carefully staged to maintain normalcy while silently collecting ammunition for the inevitable confrontation. At home, I set up subtle measures to protect myself, arranging cameras and tracking movements without alerting Michael. Every night, I reviewed my notes, comparing incidents, cross-referencing statements, and building a timeline of his aggression and controlling behavior. It was exhausting mentally and emotionally, but the sense of control I gained was empowering. I discovered that Michael had a history of intimidation disguised as concern, manipulation disguised as generosity, and violence hidden behind closed doors. Each piece of information strengthened my resolve and clarified the path forward. Meanwhile, our interactions became a careful game of chess. He attempted to unsettle me with sharp words and subtle threats, but I maintained a composed exterior, letting him underestimate my awareness and growing capabilities. I observed his reactions to my questions, his body language, and the way he controlled conversations using these insights to anticipate his moves and avoid direct confrontation until the moment was strategically advantageous. One afternoon, I discreetly accessed emails and messages that revealed his intentions to manipulate legal documents, potentially jeopardizing my safety and autonomy. I printed the critical ones, creating a secure physical archive, ensuring that if technology failed, or if he discovered my activities, I would still have undeniable proof. I also began documenting the psychological aspects of his abuse, the gaslighting, the isolation, the subtle threats masked as advice. Each entry detailed the language he used, the timing, and the intended effect, forming a comprehensive narrative that could be presented to authorities or in court. Simultaneously, I strengthened my support network, contacting close friends and trusted colleagues who could intervene if necessary and provide testimony or assistance. Their cautious involvement was crucial, ensuring that my investigation remained discreet and safe. The necklace, once a token of twisted affection, became an emblem of my methodical work, a reminder that vigilance and careful observation could turn fear into evidence. I started noticing patterns in his behavior, tied to specific triggers, moments when his charm slipped, revealing glimpses of aggression and control that had previously been hidden. These observations were meticulously logged, forming a strategic map of his psychological profile that could be used to anticipate and counteract his moves. At night, exhaustion mingled with adrenaline, leaving me physically drained but mentally sharp. I understood that every detail mattered, that every small action I recorded could be decisive in establishing a clear, undeniable picture of his abuse. By the end of the second week, I had amassed a detailed body of evidence: financial records, messages, photographs, witness notes, and behavioral observations that painted a comprehensive portrait of Michael's control, manipulation, and aggression. I felt a mixture of dread and empowerment, aware of the danger inherent in possessing this knowledge, yet emboldened by the growing clarity of my strategy. The groundwork was complete, and I was prepared to move forward with intelligent, calculated steps. I knew that exposing Michael would require precision, courage, and timing, but I had built a foundation that would support me, protect me, and ensure that my resistance would not be invisible. I had transformed fear into action, observation into proof, and the feeling of being trapped into a deliberate, strategic plan that could lead to liberation and justice. The necklace rested on the dresser, no longer just a symbol of deceit, but a reminder that even objects tainted by manipulation could be catalysts for revelation. I had become the quiet architect of a reckoning, aware that the next moves would determine the outcome of years of suppressed fear and controlled living. Every note, every photograph, every document was a step closer to exposing the truth, reclaiming autonomy, and delivering consequences that were long overdue. The sense of anticipation and controlled tension was palpable each day, bringing me closer to confronting Michael, not just emotionally, but with undeniable evidence that would leave him powerless to deny his actions. By the time the third week arrived, I was ready to escalate, prepared to transform the intelligence I had gathered into decisive public action that would ensure justice and demonstrate that manipulation and violence could not remain hidden. I felt an emerging sense of empowerment, a quiet but unshakable confidence that my careful planning and courage would bring clarity, accountability, and the vindication I had longed for. With the evidence meticulously gathered and organized, I began to plan the public confrontation that would finally expose Michael's abuse and manipulation, a calculated move designed to maximize impact and ensure undeniable accountability. I first consulted with Lisa, outlining each piece of evidence and discussing the safest, most strategic way to present it so that the full scope of his controlling and violent behavior would be irrefutable. We agreed that the setting had to be public but controlled somewhere. Michael could not twist the narrative, and where witnesses could immediately corroborate everything. I mapped out the timing, choosing a family gathering that Michael considered significant, ensuring that his pride and ego would draw him in while also guaranteeing the presence of neutral observers who could testify to his reactions and behavior. I contacted a trusted lawyer, carefully explaining my strategy without revealing all details, securing legal advice to protect myself from any retaliatory actions Michael might attempt. Every step was precise. Each decision weighed against potential risks because I knew that exposing a manipulative abuser required absolute clarity and preparation. I prepared a dossier neatly organized and labeled, including photographs of bruises, screenshots of threatening messages, financial records demonstrating manipulation, and a detailed timeline of incidents that traced the evolution of his controlling behavior over the years. Each document was paired with explanatory notes, ensuring that anyone reviewing the evidence would immediately understand the severity and calculated nature of Michael's actions. I rehearsed the confrontation in my mind, envisioning Michael's possible responses, anticipating attempts at gaslighting or denial, and preparing concise, calm rebuttals that relied solely on the evidence at hand. I also enlisted the support of 2 close friends who could serve as witnesses, providing silent backup and ensuring that I would not face Michael alone in this pivotal moment. On the day of the confrontation, I dressed, deliberately projecting confidence and composure, an external image that contrasted sharply with the turmoil I had endured in private. The necklace, now cleaned of blood, but preserved as a symbolic piece of the ordeal, rested in a small, clear display box as part of the evidence I intended to reveal. As the gathering commenced, Michael entered with his usual charm and arrogance, unaware that the meticulously laid plan was about to unfold. I began by calmly addressing the assembled family members, explaining that I had discovered serious evidence of manipulation threats and physical abuse, and that I intended to share the facts so that everyone could understand the truth. One by one, I presented the evidence, allowing the documents, photographs, and messages to speak louder than any accusation could. Michael's initial smirk faded as he realized the depth and organization of what I had prepared, his attempts at charm and diversion faltering under the weight of concrete proof. Lisa's presence, discreet but supportive, reinforced the credibility of my statements, while my friends ensured that no interference could obscure the facts. I maintained a steady, calm tone, allowing the timeline of his abuse to unfold clearly and chronologically, each incident contextualized to show pattern, intent, and impact. The reactions of family members shifted from disbelief to shock as they absorbed the extent of his manipulations, the years of gaslighting, and the concealed violence. Michael tried to interrupt, to deny, to shift blame, but each statement was immediately countered by evidence, leaving him increasingly flustered and isolated. I emphasized the psychological and emotional manipulation as much as the physical abuse, ensuring that the full scope of control and intimidation was undeniable. By the end of the presentation, the atmosphere was tense, charged with the recognition that the man they had admired or tolerated for years had engaged in systematic abuse. I concluded by stating clearly that I would pursue all legal avenues necessary to ensure accountability, and that the evidence was now in the hands of trusted witnesses and professionals. The necklace, once a disturbing token of violence, now symbolized the transformation from victimhood to agency, displayed as part of the incontrovertible record. Michael's reaction, a mix of anger, disbelief, and desperation, confirmed the impact of the confrontation, and I allowed silence to reinforce the gravity of the situation. No outbursts, no dramatics from me, only the calm, factual presentation of truth, leaving him powerless to manipulate perception. In the aftermath, the family began to discuss and acknowledge the reality, their support slowly shifting toward me, while Michael retreated, confronted not just with evidence, but with the collective recognition of his actions. I felt a profound mixture of relief, vindication, and empowerment, knowing that the careful planning and disciplined execution had rendered his manipulation impotent and visible to all. Every detail, from the timing to the documentation to the presence of witnesses, had been critical in transforming years of private suffering into a public reckoning with lasting consequences. By the evening's end, it was clear that the confrontation had succeeded. The abuser's control was broken, the truth laid bare, and my position not just as a victim, but as an assertive, intelligent force for accountability firmly established. I knew that this moment marked the turning point, the irreversible shift from fear and suppression to agency, visibility, and justice, and that Michael would face the consequences of his actions with no avenue for denial or evasion. The planning, preparation, and execution had transformed a period of silent suffering into a powerful declaration of truth, setting the stage for final resolution justice and the restoration of personal autonomy. As the evidence settled in the room and the weight of my words sank into the minds of family members, Michael's reaction shifted from disbelief to visible anger, a dangerous cocktail of humiliation and frustration that threatened to erupt in unpredictable ways. His face flushed red, jaw tightening, hands trembling slightly as he tried to collect his thoughts and regain some semblance of control, but the meticulous presentation of facts left him with nowhere to hide. I remained calm, maintaining eye contact and steady breathing, projecting authority and resolve, a stark contrast to the chaos brewing in him. Michael attempted to interrupt, his voice rising in volume, a mix of accusation and deflection. But I had anticipated this. Each outburst was immediately countered by documentation. Each denial met with a photograph message or financial record that spoke louder than any word he could utter. He tried the classic tactics of gaslighting, suggesting that the bruises were accidents, that the threatening messages were jokes, that I had misinterpreted every interaction. But the precise timeline I had prepared rendered his distortions transparent to all present. I emphasized the consistency of the evidence, showing patterns of behavior that spanned years, illustrating the calculated nature of his control and the escalation from subtle manipulation to outright violence. The necklace, once an intimate gift turned sinister, was displayed openly. The faint traces of dried blood preserved as undeniable proof of the danger he had inflicted. Michael's tone grew harsher, more desperate, and he began to make veiled threats, suggesting that I would regret exposing him, attempting to intimidate both me and the witnesses. But the presence of Lisa and my friends ensured that he could not corner me or isolate me in the moment. I responded calmly, stating clearly that every threat was documented, that any further intimidation would only reinforce the legal and social consequences he faced, and that the public nature of this exposure left him no room for manipulation or private retaliation. Family members shifted uncomfortably, some visibly horrified, others whispering among themselves as the reality of Michael's actions crystallized before them. He lunged toward explanation, attempting to rewrite history, but the chronology photographs and messages left no gaps for plausible deniability, and the witnesses corroborated every point silently with their presence. Michael's escalating anger became erratic. He began pacing, gesturing wildly, and at one point slammed a hand on the table, rattling the carefully organized evidence. Yet my composure remained unbroken. I allowed him to exhaust himself, letting the contrast between his outbursts and my calm authority deepen the impression of control and credibility. As the confrontation continued, I carefully interjected, narrating the emotional and psychological toll his actions had taken, describing how fear, shame, and manipulation had dictated my daily life, ensuring that his abuse was understood not just as isolated incidents, but as a pervasive, controlling pattern. Michael's voice cracked, his arguments losing structure, and he resorted to blaming others, claiming that I had provoked him, that the family had encouraged exaggeration, but each claim was immediately countered with factual evidence, leaving him increasingly isolated in his false narrative. The room, tense and charged, bore witness to the unraveling of his carefully constructed persona, the facade of charm and control stripped away under the scrutiny of undeniable proof and calm, assertive presentation. Michael's escalation, once intended to intimidate and regain dominance, instead highlighted his instability and the severity of his actions, shifting sympathy toward me and validating the planning, evidence, and courage that had brought the confrontation to life. Every threat, every attempt at deflection, every rise in volume only reinforced the clarity of the truth and the necessity of the public exposure. By the end of the session, Michael was visibly drained, his attempts at control extinguished, replaced with a mix of anger, shame, and disbelief, while the family, now fully aware, began to process the reality of years of hidden abuse. I felt the steady surge of empowerment, knowing that the meticulous preparation, strategic presentation, and calm resilience had successfully countered every tactic he employed, ensuring that his escalation only confirmed the narrative of control, manipulation, and violence that he could no longer deny. The public exposure had worked exactly as intended. His reactions recorded and witnessed served as further proof of the pattern of abuse, solidifying accountability and setting the stage for inevitable legal and social consequences. I could see the irreversible shift the moment when the power dynamic had fully inverted, leaving Michael facing the undeniable reality of his actions while I stood resolute, fully aware of my agency, and ready to pursue the next steps toward justice and lasting closure. The culmination of planning, evidence, and courage ensured that Michael's reaction, however explosive, could no longer alter the truth or escape the collective recognition of his behavior. The family's support began to quietly realign conversations forming around the confirmation of facts, while Michael, once a figure of authority and intimidation, had become a man cornered by reality, exposed to consequences he could not avoid, and fully responsible for the choices that had led to this pivotal moment. After the confrontation with Michael and the undeniable exposure of his abusive behavior, I knew that the next step had to be formal and legally binding. The emotional victory was necessary but insufficient without protection and accountability. I contacted my attorney, Sarah Collins, a seasoned family law specialist known for her meticulous approach to cases involving domestic violence and controlling partners. Sarah immediately outlined the steps we needed to take to secure restraining orders, gather further evidence, and prepare for potential criminal charges, emphasizing the importance of timing documentation and witness statements to ensure the strongest possible case. We filed for an emergency protective order against Michael, detailing the years of abuse, the physical evidence from the necklace, the threatening messages, and the public escalation during the family gathering. The court accepted the documentation and issued a temporary restraining order barring him from approaching me or contacting any of my witnesses, including friends and family members who had supported me during the confrontation. The relief of knowing that legal boundaries were now in place was profound, yet I remained cautious. Michael's unpredictability and prior attempts at manipulation meant vigilance was crucial. I also consulted with a private investigator, Mark Benson, who helped trace Michael's activities and ensured that any attempts at interference or intimidation would be documented for law enforcement. Every communication he sent, every attempt to bypass the restraining order was carefully recorded, building a comprehensive case that left no room for dispute. Meanwhile, I worked with Sarah to prepare for civil action seeking damages for emotional distress, medical expenses, and financial control he had exerted over the years, as well as compensation for the manipulation that had restricted my personal and professional freedom. Witnesses from the family gathering provided statements corroborating my account, emphasizing Michael's attempts at intimidation and his erratic, aggressive behavior. The combination of photographic evidence, messages, medical reports, and eyewitness testimony created a layered, compelling case that reinforced the public and legal narrative of abuse, leaving Michael with minimal opportunity to deny responsibility. Parallel to the legal strategy, I took steps to enhance my personal security, installing cameras in my home, changing locks, and securing digital accounts, ensuring that Michael could not exploit vulnerabilities or attempt retaliation. I also sought therapy with Dr. Helen Martinez, a trauma specialist, to process the emotional fallout, build resilience, and reinforce my mental preparedness for ongoing legal proceedings and public exposure of the abuse. As the court dates approached, Michael attempted to undermine the proceedings with lawyers of his own, offering feeble explanations, partial admissions, and sporadic claims of provocation, but the meticulous preparation of my case left him with no credible defense. Each hearing further cemented the public and legal understanding of his behavior, with judges acknowledging the consistency of evidence, the credibility of witnesses, and the severity of the threats and physical abuse documented over the years. I remained present in every session, calm and composed, allowing the facts to speak while maintaining the moral and emotional high ground, a stark contrast to Michael's erratic demeanor and increasingly desperate attempts to influence outcomes. Through each step, the combination of legal protection, strategic evidence presentation, and personal vigilance ensured that Michael's capacity for harm was contained while establishing a permanent record of accountability. By the time the final hearings concluded, permanent restraining orders were in place, civil judgments awarded, and Michael's abusive influence effectively terminated. The consequences of his actions were irreversible, and the legal system had provided the final enforceable barrier protecting my autonomy and safety. This phase marked not only legal victory, but also personal empowerment, demonstrating that meticulous planning, courage, and strategic action could transform years of abuse into a structured path toward justice, closure, and long-term protection. The culmination of legal and protective measures ensured that Michael could no longer manipulate, intimidate, or control me, and that the broader family and social network recognized the full extent of his wrongdoing, leaving him isolated, accountable, and confronted with the tangible consequences of his destructive behavior. My life, once dominated by fear and manipulation, now had a framework of security and validation, reinforcing that the calculated, intelligent resistance I had employed, coupled with public and legal exposure, was effective and transformative. The sense of relief, though tempered by the gravity of the past, was profound. Every precaution, every legal action, every witness statement contributed to a protective shield, ensuring that Michael's power over my life was definitively broken, and that justice, both public and legal, had been served comprehensively. After the legal proceedings secured my safety, the next step was to expose Michael's manipulative and abusive nature to the broader circle of friends, colleagues, and family members who had previously been unaware or dismissive of his behavior. The goal was not revenge for the sake of satisfaction, but accountability that would prevent further harm and ensure transparency. I worked closely with investigative journalist Laura Bennett, known for her in-depth reporting on domestic abuse cases and high-profile personal narratives, to craft a detailed exposé that would present the facts, the evidence, and the impact of Michael's behavior without sensationalizing the story. We carefully curated the chronology of events, beginning with the early signs of emotional manipulation, the progressive control he exerted over finances, social interactions, and professional decisions, and culminating in the public confrontation at the anniversary party, where the bloody necklace incident became undeniable proof of his violent tendencies. Laura's editorial team verified every statement, photo message, and witness account, ensuring that the story would withstand scrutiny and that Michael could not legally dispute the documented evidence. The article was released in a major online publication, accompanied by social media posts linking to the report, providing an unambiguous account of the abuse, the legal consequences, and the steps I had taken to protect myself. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Friends who had previously questioned my judgment expressed support, colleagues reached out with offers of assistance and solidarity, and family members who had been complicit or silent faced the undeniable reality of the abuse they had witnessed or ignored. Michael attempted to counter with statements minimizing the events, claiming exaggeration or misunderstanding, but the combination of photographic evidence, medical records, witness testimonies, and legal documents left him with no credible defense. His reputation, meticulously cultivated over years of social manipulation and control, began to unravel as the public recognized the depth of his deceit and the calculated nature of his abuse. Former associates and friends who had once admired him shared their own experiences of manipulation, creating a broader picture of his toxic patterns and further discrediting any attempts at public denial. The exposure not only cemented my personal vindication, but also served as a cautionary tale for others who might encounter similar controlling and violent behaviors in their own relationships, highlighting the importance of vigilance, documentation, and strategic public disclosure when personal safety and justice are at stake. Meanwhile, Michael's social and professional circles contracted. Opportunities for work, social engagements, and familial alliances diminished as trust eroded and his past actions were brought into the open. The combination of legal accountability and public exposure ensured that Michael's capacity to harm was curtailed and that he would face consequences both privately and publicly, with the narrative firmly controlled by factual evidence and credible testimonies. I remained focused on documenting the ongoing impact, maintaining transparency with friends and colleagues, and supporting advocacy for victims of domestic abuse, using my experience as both a warning and a guide for navigating similar situations. The public acknowledgement of the abuse and the legal victories created a definitive turning point. Michael could no longer rewrite history or manipulate perceptions, and the long-term implications for his personal and professional life were severe and irreversible. Each day that passed reinforced the power of strategic resistance, careful documentation, and intelligent exposure, demonstrating that combining legal action with public accountability can dismantle patterns of control and abuse while empowering survivors. By taking control of the narrative, I not only secured justice for myself, but also contributed to a larger societal recognition of the mechanisms of domestic abuse, the importance of evidence-based reporting, and the necessity of unwavering action when facing individuals who exploit power and trust to harm others. The culmination of these efforts solidified my autonomy, restored my reputation among peers, and publicly highlighted the consequences of unchecked abusive behavior, leaving Michael with diminished credibility, strained relationships, and an indelible record of his actions that could no longer be ignored or denied. The aftermath of exposing Michael and securing my safety left me in a state of exhaustion both physically and emotionally, yet determined to reclaim the life that had been systematically undermined over the years. The first step in the healing process was acknowledging the trauma I had endured and allowing myself to feel without judgment, recognizing that the fear, anxiety, and anger were valid responses to sustained abuse. I began regular therapy sessions with Dr. Samantha Collins, a licensed psychologist specializing in trauma recovery and relational abuse, focusing on rebuilding self-esteem, understanding patterns of manipulation, and developing strategies to maintain boundaries in future relationships. Each session was emotionally taxing, requiring me to revisit painful memories, but also empowering as I gradually reclaimed ownership of my narrative and agency. Alongside therapy, I reconnected with friends and supportive family members who had remained loyal despite Michael's attempts to isolate me, engaging in meaningful conversations, shared activities, and small rituals that reinforced connection and trust. These interactions reminded me that genuine relationships are based on respect, care, and mutual support, contrasting sharply with the controlling dynamic I had endured. Physically, I committed to restoring my health and well-being, attending regular medical checkups to address injuries and lingering effects of stress, adopting a consistent fitness routine, and prioritizing nutrition and rest, all of which contributed to a sense of stability and control over my body and mind. Professionally, I revisited the career opportunities that had been stifled by Michael's interference, updating my portfolio, reconnecting with mentors, and pursuing projects that reflected my skills and passions. Each small accomplishment reaffirmed my independence and reinforced the principle that I was capable of thriving without reliance on those who had previously sought to control or diminish me. Financial independence became a central pillar of rebuilding as I reorganized personal finances, sought guidance from a financial advisor to establish secure accounts, and developed a long-term plan that included savings investments and emergency provisions, ensuring that future manipulations of resources were impossible. Socially, I carefully curated my circle, prioritizing relationships with individuals who demonstrated empathy, honesty, and respect while setting firm boundaries with those who exhibited toxic or controlling tendencies. This selective approach allowed me to cultivate a supportive environment that nurtured personal growth and resilience. Spiritually and emotionally, I explored mindfulness practices, meditation, and journaling, documenting daily reflections and small victories, which helped in processing emotions, recognizing progress, and maintaining a grounded perspective amid lingering challenges and occasional reminders of past trauma. Gradually, I reintegrated leisure and passion projects into my routine, such as painting, volunteering, and engaging in community initiatives, each providing fulfillment, a sense of purpose, and opportunities to connect with like-minded individuals, further reinforcing autonomy and self-worth. The process of healing was non-linear, with moments of doubt, flashbacks, and unexpected triggers, yet over time, these moments became manageable, as coping strategies support networks and personal achievements strengthened resilience. Each challenge overcome served as proof of my capability to thrive independently. I also took steps to educate myself and others on recognizing signs of abuse and manipulation, using my experience to mentor and support individuals facing similar situations, turning trauma into empowerment and fostering a sense of community vigilance and advocacy. Celebrating small milestones, whether attending a professional event, enjoying a solo vacation, or reconnecting with friends without fear or hesitation, became symbols of recovery and personal agency. Each achievement underscored the tangible results of deliberate, focused effort in reclaiming life. Over months, the sense of constant fear and hypervigilance diminished, replaced by confidence in my judgment decision-making and ability to maintain healthy boundaries, marking a profound internal transformation from victimhood to empowered survivor. The culmination of therapy, social reintegration, professional advancement, and personal self-care resulted in a life reconstructed on my own terms, free from manipulation, control, and intimidation, demonstrating that resilience, intelligence, and persistence can reverse the impact of years of abuse. By embracing this comprehensive approach to healing, I not only restored my own life, but established a blueprint for long-term well-being, independence, and the capacity to inspire others who may face similar challenges, proving that recovery and thriving after abuse is possible with deliberate, strategic, and compassionate action. Looking back on the events that had consumed the past several years of my life, I realized that the journey from fear and subjugation to empowerment and freedom was as much about reclaiming my sense of self as it was about seeking justice. The necklace incident that had initially shocked and terrified me became the catalyst for a profound transformation, revealing not only the depths of Michael's cruelty, but also the strength, intelligence, and resilience that had been lying dormant within me. The lessons learned throughout this ordeal were numerous and deeply personal, starting with the critical importance of trusting one's instincts and recognizing patterns of manipulation and control, even when they are subtle or masked by charm or familial obligation. Ignoring these signals, as I had once done, can have serious emotional, physical, and financial consequences, underscoring the value of awareness and vigilance. I came to understand that establishing boundaries is not an act of defiance, but a necessity for self-preservation, and that enforcing those boundaries requires courage, clarity, and consistency. This principle extended to every relationship, professional interaction, and social engagement, creating a framework for safe, respectful, and mutually beneficial connections. Forgiveness, while often misunderstood, became an internal tool rather than a social expectation. Forgiving myself for the moments of doubt, hesitation, and self-blame allowed me to release the emotional weight that had impeded my growth, while holding Michael accountable externally reinforced justice and clarified consequences without compromising my personal healing. Sharing my story publicly through writing, speaking engagements, and supporting others facing similar abuse provided both catharsis and empowerment, transforming a personal tragedy into a platform for awareness, prevention, and advocacy. The feedback and gratitude from individuals who recognized themselves in my experiences affirmed the universal importance of visibility and community support in overcoming isolation and trauma. Financial and practical independence proved to be fundamental pillars of empowerment, as rebuilding control over my resources, career, and daily life insulated me from further manipulation and reinforced confidence in my decision-making abilities. The intentional cultivation of skills networks and strategic planning ensured that my autonomy was sustainable and resilient against future attempts at control. The emotional journey was neither linear nor easy, punctuated by moments of doubt, anger, grief, and lingering trauma. Yet each emotional challenge became an opportunity to apply coping mechanisms, rely on support systems, and reinforce self-trust, gradually creating a stable internal equilibrium that could withstand external pressures. In reflecting on the legal and societal aspects of my experience, I recognized the significance of documenting abuse, seeking professional guidance, and advocating within institutional frameworks. The consequences Michael faced were the direct result of deliberate, informed actions that balanced courage with prudence, illustrating that intelligent resistance can yield tangible protective outcomes. The personal evolution that occurred throughout this journey was mirrored by the transformation of my daily life as routines, environments, and relationships were reconstructed to prioritize safety, joy, and growth. The intentional design of my surroundings and interactions reinforced the internal changes, ensuring that each day reflected the empowerment I had fought to reclaim. Looking toward the future, I embraced a philosophy of continued vigilance, lifelong learning, and proactive self-care, recognizing that empowerment is an ongoing process rather than a singular achievement. Each new challenge would be met with the lessons learned from experience tempered by self-awareness, courage, and strategic thinking. The cumulative impact of these years of struggle and subsequent recovery became a testament not only to my resilience, but to the universal potential for overcoming oppression, asserting boundaries, and achieving justice. My story, once marked by fear and manipulation, evolved into a narrative of triumph, agency, and inspiration for anyone confronting similar adversity. Finally, I urge anyone facing abuse, manipulation, or toxic control to acknowledge their worth, seek support, document experiences, and take deliberate steps toward reclaiming autonomy and safety. The path may be difficult, fraught with emotional and logistical challenges, yet the ultimate reward is a life lived authentically free from coercion with the power to thrive, inspire, and create meaningful change. The narrative of that fateful anniversary, marked initially by horror at the sight of blood on a symbol of love, transformed into a story of profound resilience, strategic resistance, and public accountability, demonstrating unequivocally that intelligence, courage, and persistence can reverse even the deepest imprint of abuse, and that the journey from victimhood to empowered survivor is both possible and profoundly rewarding. By sharing my experience, I hope to illuminate the path for others, validate their struggles, and encourage the deliberate, intelligent pursuit of justice, freedom, and self-realization, proving that the human spirit can endure, recover, and flourish even in the face of betrayal, violence, and control.